Okay, my name is Francesca Wedemeyer, and I am a member and volunteer here at the League of Women Voters. We're so happy to be able to have this event, Civility, this evening. Although we are a little sad, normally this would be in person at a brewery or a winery. But I hope that you all made do by bringing a beverage to help you with an impromptu dance party while listening to that music at the beginning of this meeting. So basically, Civility is normally our time to get together and talk through different things that are going on, and particularly today coming up on election season, we wanted to provide a space for our members and for the community to come together and look over all the propositions and measures on our ballot that are facing us in the upcoming election. So just a quick background, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. So I think that it's a little bit unique in the sense that instead of running with a party's specific goals or demands, the League does a really good job, I think, I'm obviously biased, of trying to get a lot of research and understanding all sides of whatever is going on in the world and in society that faces us when we look at the different policies that are being put together. So that's really what we hope to do today, is give you that full spectrum and background when looking at everything that's available to you on your ballot. With that, so we have approximately 17 in total to go over the course of this evening. So we're going to try to go pretty quick, be really efficient, but we also want to be mindful that sometimes they are confusing. So if you do have questions, please pop them into the chat. We'll make sure to bring them up and try to ask as we go through. We really don't want to leave anyone behind or confused. It should take approximately an hour and a half to go through all of them, leaving a little time at the end for a general Q&A. Again, we are nonpartisan, so we would love good questions, which would be like, what is the impact of this initiative? Or, I don't really understand this language. Could you explain it to me further? Rather than asking, what should I do? What should I vote for? What are you going to vote for? We can't really answer those questions, sorry. So with that, I think those are the goals, that's our thing. One thing that you can look out for in our chat is we're gonna send out some links. So there's two that you should keep an eye open for. The first is a worksheet. It should have been sent out to you before this meeting. And if not, no worries, you can pop it open now and have it for reference. I find that it's really helpful just for keeping notes and writing things down as we go through. Again, 17 different things to remember. It's a lot. So the worksheet is helpful to guide you along and give you sort of a visual map of what we're going over. The second thing that we'll put into the chat here is a link to our actual site. So if you're interested in what we do, or if you feel inspired and want to join or donate or volunteer, we would love to have you. The more the merrier, especially during times like these. So go and check out our website. And then again, all of the information that we're presenting tonight will also be available on Voters Edge, and we'll send all of these links out by email at the end of this event. So don't stress about writing anything down or bookmarking. We'll follow up with you to make sure you have it all and can find it once you leave us this evening. Before I pass it off to our amazing team who will lead us through all of the propositions and measures this evening, we would love to take a group photo. And so if everyone could turn on their camera for a moment, sweats are totally welcome. We live in an era of sweats, so you're fine. And if you could cheers with whatever beverage you have, like a nice seltzer here. And Kim, you might have to come and creative direct us a little bit.
All right, good.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Perfect. Cool. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to the amazing Kim, who runs all of this behind the scenes and is incredible, and Lord knows where we'd be without her. So Kim, do you want to go ahead and take it away?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Knox. I'm program chair and co-chair of the candidate forums with the League of Women Voters of San Diego. So I'm really excited to see all your faces this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And now I want to introduce you to Kate Parmer.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Kate Parmer. I am one of your two presenters tonight. So we will be going over all 17 props and measures like Francesca said. And I'm gonna go ahead and kick us off and share my screen. And I have been told that I'm coming across as very blurry. I apologize, and I have absolutely no idea what to do to fix that, so sorry if I look blurry to you guys.
You're fine. And by the way, Susan Baxter is assisting us with the chat tonight, so she's going to be putting links in there and answering questions. So thank you, Susan.
Yep. All right. So, like I said, my name's Kate Parmer. I'm a board member of the League of Women Voters of San Diego. I'm also the co-chair of the Youth Empowerment Committee. I also want to give that shout out to Susan Baxter, who is already rocking it, doing a great job providing all of that straight up information, all of the links. She'll also be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, put them right there in the chat. She will either answer those in real time, or she'll let us know at the end of each of the props that we're going over if you have any questions to address the group. So, Francesca mentioned that we are the League of Women Voters. We've been around for 100 years. We were founded in 1920, which was the year that women got the right to vote, exactly 100 years ago. As Francesca mentioned, we are proudly nonpartisan. We have never in 100 years endorsed any candidate. We do, however, advocate for certain legislation, including several of the props and the measures that we're going to be going over today. However, we have a very strict firewall between our advocacy arm and our education arm. Tonight's event is an education event, which means that we do not want in any way to impart our views on anyone here. And in fact, one of my goals tonight is that you don't know how the league feels or how I personally feel on any of the props or measures. And I know that several of my friends who are joining in tonight are really bummed to hear that, because I know that you joined so that you would have me tell you what to vote for. So if you want my opinion, you're just gonna have to buy me a beer at another time. So let's talk about this year's election. So this year specifically, all active registered voters in California will receive a ballot in the mail. You likely, in fact, received it last week. And if you have not yet received your ballot, please make sure that you're registered and that your information, including your mailing address, is correct. You can check that out at voterstatus.sos.ca.gov. You can also track your ballot at any time at where'smyballot.sos.ca.gov. So this year, we're all getting them, all of our ballots by mail. There are 126 Dropbox locations to drop them off. Those are available today through November 3rd. So they're already open and they're already available. You can find the drop boxes closest to you on the back of your ballot, or I'm sorry, not on the back of your ballot, on your ballot cover page, which is the back side of the paper with the voted sticker on it. You can also find your ballot locations at sdvote.com. In addition to mail-in ballots and drop-off ballots, you will have, or there will be 4 days of in-person voting from October 31st to November 3rd, with 235 polling locations across the county, which you can also find on sdvote.com. Okay, so today we're going to be going over propositions and ballots. We'll specifically be discussing the history of how these got on the ballot, what they do, who's for them, who's against them, and who's contributing the money. We'll also be providing arguments that supporters and opponents make, but please note that we do not fact check those arguments. So please exercise individual critical judgment for anything related to supporters or opponents' arguments specifically. So what are California state propositions? They're essentially laws that come on the books or that come to us via ballot that we get to vote on that either are brand new or they amend an existing law. There's 2 ways that they can get on the ballot. The first is a citizens initiative. Any one of us can put any ballot on or any proposition on the ballot as long as we get enough signatures. Any citizen of California can do that. The second way is just straight up good old politicians or the state lawmakers can put things on the ballot. All of the propositions today, all 12 of them, require a simple majority to pass. These are the 12. Hopefully this matches your little cheat sheet that you have. And let's jump right on into the first one, Proposition 14. So Proposition 14, authorize bonds continuing stem cell research. This was a citizens initiative statute. So for some background, in 2004, voters approved Proposition 71, which added a provision to the California Constitution allowing for stem cell research. It also created this new entity called the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. What CIRM specifically does is it takes money that's available for stem cell research and it allocates it down to all of the different for-profit and nonprofit entities in the state that are doing stem cell research. So in 2004, when we passed this and we created CIRM, we also authorized $3 billion in bonds to fund that stem cell research. So again, in 2004, we issued $3 billion of bonds, which CIRM got, and then allocated out to various entities within California to study stem cell research. At this point, that money is almost entirely spent. And so those original backers of that proposition, including Robert N. Klein, who's the chairman of the independent oversight of CIRM, gathered enough signatures to request another bond measure come on this year to issue additional funds. And so what Proposition 14 does, so what we're voting on for Proposition 14, is it authorizes the state to borrow an additional $5.5 billion to fund grants through CIRM to those various entities throughout California to study stem cell research. Couple of notes about that. Of that $5.5 billion, $1.5 billion is specifically set aside to research therapy for brain and nervous system disorders, so things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And it also makes several changes to CIRM in order to improve patient affordability and access to stem cell treatments. So as many of us know, we have some amazing treatments that exist out there. However, just like, diabetes and all of these other issues that we have, the best medicines are often outside of, or often not available to us purely because of either general availability or affordability. And so one of the things that Prop 14 does is that it sets aside some money to set up the specific department dedicated to developing policies and programs to improve patient affordability and access to these stem cell treatments. So let's take a step back though really quickly and talk about what bonds are. So we're talking about issuing $5.5 billion in bonds. So bonds are essentially just a loan. They're very similar to a mortgage. And so if you have a big purchase that you want to make, if you want to build a big building or, in this case, support a bunch of stem cell research programs, you want a whole bunch of money up front, so you loan money that you pay back over time in principal and interest. Again, similar to a mortgage. And so what this would be doing is it's specifically borrowing $5.5 billion, which would be paid back in principal and interest over the next several decades. So again, the purpose of this is it's just like a mortgage. It's a whole bunch of money up front. You end up paying more in the long run, but it's so that you can get that money up front. So what that means is that even though we're talking about $5.5 billion in bonds, the ultimate price tag on this would be $7.8 billion. So that's $5.5 billion in principal. So that's the amount that we can use for the stem cell research. And then $2.3 billion in interest, which goes to the investors. The state would repay this at an estimated average of about $260 million per year over the next roughly 30 years. That sounds like a lot of money. However, that's actually less than 1% of the state general fund budget. So costs from this can also be offset by a provision that requires payment from new inventions that result from bond money research. So if I'm an independent entity, the state gave me money to do stem cell therapy or stem cell research, I invent something new out of it, then a portion of that proceeds goes back to the state. With that being said, to date from the 2004 legislation, only $350,000 has gone back to the state. So who knows what the future holds, but that's what's happened so far. So we've given you the background of why this is on the ballot. We've given you the background of what this does and what the financial impact is. So we're going to talk now about the supporters and opponents. Again, please keep in mind, we have not vetted any of the supporters or opponents' arguments. So supporters say that nearly half of all California families include someone who could benefit from stem cell research, treatments, and cures. They say that the original stem cell funding has led to significant treatments and cures, including 92 FDA-approved clinical trials and over 2,900 medical discoveries. They say that new revenues, economic activity, and jobs generated that will contribute to California's economic recovery and will only cost an average of less than $5 per person annually. To date, there's been about $8.5 million raised, and there are over 100 organizations and individuals supporting Prop 14, including those on your screen. Opponents say that this wastes billions in the middle of an economic crisis with soaring unemployment and budget shortfalls. They say that it funds a bureaucracy with serious problems, and some have questioned the integrity and independence of the state agency overseeing these funds. They say that others can do this job better, such as the National Institute of Health or private investors and companies. They say that Prop 14 means higher taxes, layoffs, or both, that paying back costs would mean huge tax increases or laying off thousands of nurses and other heroes who do the real work of keeping California healthy. To date, there has been, is that correct, $250 in total raised, Kim? Is that supposed to be $250?
Yeah, that's the information that we've gotten.
Okay, so a whopping $250 has been raised in opposition of this. Might want to fact check that after the fact, and I'll get back to you guys on that. And the opponents include 2 individuals and the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. And I apologize, I didn't update that slide. So in summary, a yes vote on Proposition 14 means that the state would be authorized to sell $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds, primarily for stem cell research and the development of new medical treatments in California. A no vote means the state would not have that authorization to sell any additional bonds for stem cell research. I'm going to take a pause, ask Susan if we have any questions about Prop 14. And I'm going to take that as a no, and we're going to move on to Prop 15. Fantastic. Okay, so Prop 15, something completely different. This increases funding sources for public schools, community colleges, and local government services by changing tax assessment of commercial and industrial property. This is a citizens-initiated constitutional amendment. So Prop 15 is one that you've probably heard a lot of supporters and opponents for. This is one that's getting a lot of airtime right now, both in TV and local debates and whatnot. So I really want to make sure everyone understands this. I'm going to go over this one a little bit more slowly. So let's talk first about property taxes in general. So the way that property taxes work is that all real property, so homes, businesses, agriculture, are subject to taxes. The amount that those properties are taxed on is based on the assessed value. The assessed value is theoretically the same as the market value, or what one would pay for a new home or business when it is first bought, and then it moves from there. So let's say that you've got property taxes are, this is very unrealistic. This is purely for mathematical purposes. Let's say that property taxes are 10% of the assessed value, and you've got a property valued at $1,000. So that means that you have $100 per year in property taxes. If, say the following year, your property value was to go up to $2,000, then all of a sudden your taxes would double as well. So your taxes would go to $200. So if the value of your property goes up, so will your property taxes. With that being said, back in 1978, we passed a very famous proposition called Proposition 13. Proposition 13 limited the amount of property taxes that could be increased year over year. The way that it did this was by limiting the amount that assessed value could increase year over year. All of us who own property here in California know that that amount, without limitations on it, can drive up significantly. And all of a sudden, a house that I've lived in for years and I paid property taxes on, if that assessed value were to shoot up, then I might not be able to afford my own property taxes in my own house. So Prop 13 came along in 1978 to put a limit on it. Specifically, it put a 2% limit on it. So that year over year that I live in my house, that I own my business, that I have my farm, my assessed value can only increase by 2% per year. And so that limits the amount that your property taxes go up. So that's the background in terms of where we sit today with property taxes. So what does Prop 15 do specifically with property taxes? So Prop 15 does not do anything to residential property or to agricultural property. It very specifically requires that commercial and industrial property be reassessed to market value at least every 3 years. So we're going to take a step back from that. I said before that property taxes on a house that I live in or a business that I own can only be increased by 2% each year. So the way, so the way that property taxes catch up over time is that when I sell my house or I sell my business, then that property gets reassessed to fair market value. And so if I've been living in my home for the past 20 years and then I sell my property to Kim, odds are that Kim's going to be paying significantly more in property taxes than I would, because mine's been limited to 2% per year. And as soon as I sell it, it gets reassessed at fair market value. But what happens is that since Prop 13 initially passed, residences get sold a lot more often than businesses do, especially large businesses. And so the proportion of state taxes that homeowners pay versus business owners has significantly increased. So back in the 70s, it was something like homeowners paid something like 60 or 70% of property taxes, I want to say, and please feel free to fact check me on anyone who's following that. And it's significantly more these days. I want to say it's somewhere closer to about 90% that homeowners pay versus businesses pay. So again, that's because businesses, large businesses especially, don't change hands as often, so they aren't reassessed. And so that's what prompted Prop 15. And so what Prop 15 says is that at least every 3 years, all big businesses have to be reassessed to market value. So what does big business mean? Big business means any business that's valued at over $3 million. And so if you have a business that's valued at less than $3 million, this does not apply to you. If you've got a business that's larger than $3 million, then at least every 3 years, you will have to have your property reassessed to market value. That will increase those taxes on those properties. So that is the overall moral of the story of what Prop 15 does. So again, it does not affect residences. It does not affect agriculture. It does not affect businesses that are valued at less than $3 million. However, if you have more than $3 million, you're going to be reassessed every 3 years. That's the main moral of the story. There's one more component of Prop 15, which is meant to offset any adverse effects to small business owners. And what this does is it exempts personal property taxes on all businesses for up to $500,000. So personal property taxes are things that are not nailed down. So computers, printers, those sorts of things. So your first $500,000 of what you own in that as a small business owner, or as any sort of business owner, are exempted from taxes. And if you're a business owner with less than 50 employees, then you're exempted altogether from personal property taxes. So that's it. That is the entirety of Prop 15. The fiscal bottom line is that this would produce about $6.5 to $11.5 billion per year in additional property tax revenue locally. The way that it works is you've got your local funding formula for schools. So money that would go to schools, which is 40%, would be allocated under the normal local funding formula. The other 60% goes directly to your local government. So for us, like San Diego City and County. So supporters of Prop 15 say that it is a fair and balanced reform that closes property tax loopholes benefiting wealthy corporations while giving tax breaks to small businesses to help our economy grow. It provides billions in new revenue for communities and schools and requires full transparency in how the money is spent. They say that 10% of the wealthiest businesses will provide more than 90% of the revenue. And it says that it keeps Prop 13's protections for homeowners, renters, and farms. And there's been nearly $48 million raised in support of Prop 15. Opponents say that Prop 15 would trigger the largest property tax increase in California's history, that additional costs will ultimately raise prices for consumers, that it will make it harder for people to start small businesses, and that it will require a huge cost to administer. And there's been over $37 million raised in opposition. So again, a yes vote means that property taxes on most commercial properties worth more than $3 million would be reassessed every 3 years in order to provide new funding to local governments and school, and a no vote keeps the property tax code as is. So, Susan, do we have any questions for Prop 15?
Yes, we do. In the chat, the first question we got was, I think it was when you were talking about the personal property. The question from Dawn was, is the value of the business or the value of the property that is reassessed? So is it property is reassessed? I know the answer is yes to that, but is the property is reassessed, but is the tables and chairs in a restaurant, are they reassessed? I think that's the question.
So the question is, what's reassessed every 3 years? That's the assessed value. So that's property.
Property.
And the $3 million thing is all the property that a company owns. If that is valued at $3 million or more, then they're subject to this, right?
Yes, and that is with a reassessment as well.
Okay. And then the other question is it normal for a change in the tax law and the incremental state revenue to be the only source for a new increase in government spending? Is there a precedent for this change in tax law? That's from Riza Bloomer.
So California has changed its tax law several times. I'm not very familiar specifically with property tax law history. Kim, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that. Yeah. So my apologies. I don't know the answer to that. Okay, and I took a really long time on Prop 15 because it was a complicated one that's getting a lot of energy, but I feel like, Susan, were you about to ask one more question, or can I pass?
One more. Are nonprofits exempt?
Do nonprofits pay in lieu? I don't know nonprofits.
I don't think there's any change to what currently, did they currently pay property tax?
No, that's a good
I haven't seen anything in the text of it that specifically mentions nonprofits, but Susan can probably look it up and put it in the chat because we need to get moving on.
I'll try to get that.
Okay.
And then I'll answer the CERM question on Proposition 14 from Riza as well in the chat.
Great, thank you. Yes, so I've taken too much time on Prop 15. I'm going to pass it over to Kim to start talking about Prop 16.
Thanks, Kate. Prop 16 allows diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions. So a little background on this. Before 1996, California universities and government offices could factor in someone's race, gender, or ethnicity in making hiring, spending, and admissions decisions. These were often called affirmative action programs. Then in 1996, voters approved Prop 209, which generally banned affirmative action. For the last 24 years, public entities have instead used modified policies and programs to consider characteristics that were not banned by Prop 209. For example, many of California universities provide outreach and support programs for students who are first in their family to attend college. Also, when making admissions decisions, consideration may be given to where students attended high school and where they live. Federal law allows policies and programs that consider certain characteristics to increase diversity within limits. Prop 209 is more restrictive than federal law. Now, state lawmakers, motivated by racial inequities highlighted by the police killing of George Floyd, voted to put this measure on the November ballot. Next slide, please. Prop 16 would repeal the section of the California Constitution introduced by Prop 209 in 1996. It would end the ban on the consideration of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in public education, public employment, and public contracting. It would allow a wider range of policies and programs to be established, as long as they are consistent with federal and state law related to equal protection. One thing it would not do is create racial quotas in university admissions, because the US Supreme Court banned those in 1978. The fiscal effects of Prop 16 are largely unknown. Because it is permissive and not a mandate, it would not require any changes to be made at all. So any number of decisions about policies could be made, but because these specific decisions are unknown, the potential fiscal effects are highly uncertain. Supporters say Prop 16 would mean equal opportunities for all Californians, and California would join 42 other states which allow affirmative action. Supporters say despite living in the most diverse state in the nation, women and people of color are still discriminated against. They say examples of affirmative action include principals being able to specifically seek to employ qualified Latino teachers in a school where most teachers are white, most students are Latino. And public universities would be able to consider a student's race as one of numerous admissions factors, including grades and schoolwork. So as you can see, this is supported by several organizations, and that also includes the University of California, California State University, and community colleges, both California senators, the governor, the San Diego mayor, and the San Diego County Democratic Party. They've raised over $17 million. Opponents say approval of Prop 16 would be a step backward, introducing a new form of discrimination to favor politicians' favorites. They say we should not perpetuate the stereotypes that minorities and women can't make it unless they get special preferences. They say Prop 16 will require costly bureaucracies to enforce its provisions, burdening taxpayers. And the opponents include Ward Connerly, who was chair of the original initiative that became Prop 209, as well as a USD professor of law, a former US congressman, and also the California Republican Party. And they've raised over $1 million. So a yes vote on Prop 16 would allow public colleges, universities, and agencies to include race, sex, color, ethnicity, and country of origin as part of their decision-making. They would be allowed to create affirmative action programs to increase diversity or to help certain groups. No simply means the current ban would remain in effect. All right, so moving on to Prop 17, this restores the right to vote after completion of a prison term. Currently, California law prohibits people that are serving a prison term or that are on parole from voting. After a person completes their parole, their right to vote is automatically restored. All persons that have served a state prison sentence are on parole for usually 3 years after release from prison. Parole is a supervised program in which people must meet certain conditions that can include living only in certain places, being subject to searches, completing rehabilitative or transition programs, and many, many more. Currently, there are approximately 50,000 people on parole in California. Now, it should be noted here that people in jail or on probation are still able to vote. Probation is different from parole. It's imposed as an alternative to serving time in county jail or state prison. If passed, Prop 17 would amend the California Constitution to allow persons on parole to vote as long as they are otherwise eligible. Because all registered voters may also run for office, persons on parole would also be able to run for office if otherwise eligible. Depending on the office, involvement in the criminal justice system might prevent someone from running. For example, if they had a conviction for perjury or bribery. The fiscal effects, passage of Prop 17 would increase ongoing county costs because county election officials would need to register voters and send them election materials. How many people actually register would determine the cost. And in addition, there would be a one-time cost for the state to update the voter registration system. Whenever it says hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's less than 1% of the general fund budget. And in this case, it's actually 0.00059%, for those who are keeping track. Supporters, they say that nearly 50,000 Californians who have completed their prison sentences pay taxes at the local, state, and federal levels. However, they are not able to vote at any level of government. They say when a person completes their prison sentence, they should be encouraged to re-enter society and have a stake in their community. They support a Florida study which found that people, or supporters cite a Florida study, I should say, which found that people who have completed their prison sentences and had their voting rights restored were less likely to commit crimes in the future. So nearly $1.2 million raised on that support side. And then the opponents are here. They say Prop 17 will allow criminals convicted of violent crimes to vote before completing their sentence, including parole. They say people convicted of nonviolent felonies are incarcerated in county jails and have the right to vote while serving their sentence. They say parole is to prove rehabilitation before full liberty, including voting rights, is restored. And if the state does not trust them to choose where to live or travel, with whom to associate, and what jobs to do, it must not trust them with decisions that will impact the lives and finances of other members of society. So a yes on Prop 17 means people on state parole who are US citizens, residents of California, and at least 18 years of age would be able to vote if they register. No means they would continue to be unable to vote. Do we want to stop for any questions here?
That would be great because they're coming fast and furious. The easiest one probably to answer quickly is the question from Deborah. Does Proposition 17 allow for the loophole that Florida has tried to implement that parolees must pay all of their fines and fees before they can vote?
No, it does not include anything about fees. So hopefully that would not be an issue here. All right, Prop 18 would permit 17-year-olds to vote in primary and special elections if they will turn 18 by the next general election. Currently, 17-year-olds in California can pre-register to vote, but they are not eligible to cast a ballot until they turn 18. So those who turn 18 between the March primary and the November general election are unable to participate in a full election cycle. Prop 18 would permit 17-year-olds to vote in a primary or special election, but only if they will turn 18 before the general election in the same election cycle and are otherwise qualified to vote. Because they would be lawfully registered voters, they would be permitted to run for office if they otherwise qualify. So just like the last one, the fiscal effects would be exactly the same. With more voters being added, there would be increased costs for election materials and updating systems. Supporters say Prop 18 would allow 17 and 18-year-olds to participate in a full election cycle. They say because so many public policies directly impact the lives of young people, many of whom do work and pay taxes, that they should be allowed to vote. They say only 22% of young adults aged 18 to 34 vote, and passage of Prop 18 would increase participation in the electoral process and promote the habit of voting, which evidence shows increases the likelihood of voting in the future. So a little over $600,000 raised in support, and the opponents, doesn't seem that any money has been raised, but they say, Kate, can you go to the opponents? They say 17-year-olds who do not pay property taxes should not be able to vote on bond issues involving taxes and public debt. And they say 17-year-olds lack the maturity to vote and need more life experience. Their brains have not yet fully developed when it comes to logic and reason, and they could be easily influenced by their teachers, who would tend to advocate for certain propositions, particularly school bond measures. Again, we do not verify any of this. This is simply what they say. Any questions? Oh, we still have one last slide. Yes or no? Yes means young people who turn 18 by the time of the general election should be able to vote in the primary of the same election cycle, even if they're only 17. No means only those who have turned 18 can vote in any California election. So I think we're going back to Kate now, right? She's our tax expert. Maybe she can't unmute.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I can unmute, I'd be happy to keep going. So, okay, great. Yes, I get all the fun tax ones. So going back, so Prop 19 changes tax assessment, transfers, and inheritance rules. This was a legislative constitutional amendment, which means that it came from our legislature. And again, simple majority to pass. Okay, so like we discussed before, generally what happens with the California property tax code is that individual residents and businesses are limited to that 2% year-over-year property tax increase. And the only time that that changes is when that when that property is sold, right? So when if I decide to move, sell my house and move to a different house, odds are my property taxes are going to increase. So Prop 19 would make two changes to the property tax code in California. So the first is dealing with something called special groups. And so there are special groups in California, including people who are over 55, people who with certain disabilities, and people who are affected by wildfires and other natural disasters, who are allowed to sell their house and buy another house without having to potentially pay more in property taxes. So they're protected, they're exempt from this reassessment that we talked about. So those groups, the over 55, the people with certain disabilities, and those affected by certain natural disasters, can sell their house, buy another house, but they can only do this once. They can take advantage of this exemption once in their lifetime, and it's only in certain counties. And it only counts for properties that are the same or less value. So if I have a $650,000 house, I can buy another $650,000 house without being penalized. But if I want to buy a $700,000 house, then I would be penalized. So what Prop 19 would do is it would increase the number of times that these special groups would be exempt from 1 time to 3 times. And that's specifically for the over 55 and for those who are disabled. Those who are affected by wildfires and other natural disasters only have the 1-time exemption still. But Prop 19 would increase the exemptions to 3 times in their lifetime for those other special groups. And it would also allow them to buy more expensive property and have that same exemption. So that's the main first part of Prop 19, is just increasing, changing the rules around those special groups. The second thing that Prop 19 does is it changes how property works when it is inherited. So currently, any property in California that is inherited is not subject to reassessment. So that does not count as a selling, right? It changes hands, but it doesn't get reassessed. What Prop 19 would do is it says, actually, we are going to reassess inherited property unless it's the heir's primary residence. So if I'm living with my parents and they will their property to me, my property taxes aren't going to increase. I'm not going to get a reassessment because of that. But if if my parents have their own house, I have my own house, my parents give me their house in their will, then I would have to pay property taxes on that if I chose to keep it, because it's not my primary residence. On the other hand, we could just sell it, and then that new seller would essentially pay that higher property taxes. So those are the two main Those are the two changes that happened in Prop 19. So it would increase the exemptions for special groups, and it would disallow the inheritance exemption unless it's at heir's primary residence. So the fiscal bottom line is that according to the Legislative Analyst's Office, the revenue from eliminating the inheritance exemption is expected to offset the revenue lost from expanding the special groups exemption. So the anticipated net result would be tens of millions of dollars annually in revenue for the state and for the state and local governments. This could grow to several $100 million annually. And written in the law, or written in the proposition, is that proceeds from this, these additional monies, would specifically go towards fire suppression efforts in the state. So, supporters of Prop 19 say that it expands Prop 13 rules for homeowners who are seniors, wildfire victims, or people with disabilities, allowing the transfer of their home's property tax value to replacement homes anywhere in California. It closes tax loopholes on inherited properties not used as primary residences, directing increased tax revenue to fire protection, schools, and local government. And there's been just over $40 million raised to date. Opponents, on the other hand, say that the California Constitution was amended 3 times to protect the right of families to pass their home and up to $1 million of other property to their heirs without changing the Prop 13 tax assessment. Reassessment to market value will force families to sell their property because they cannot afford higher property taxes. And a much lower amount of $45,000 raised in opposition. So again, a yes vote means that those special groups that we talked about would be able to take advantage of this exemption up to 3 times as opposed to just 1 time in their life, and they would be able to apply that to the higher property, to new houses with higher property value. And only inherited property used as primary homes or farms would be eligible for property tax savings. And no vote does not change the tax code. Any questions on Prop 19?
Lots of questions, Kate. So Deborah asks, so the 1% of sale price for the property I purchased cannot exceed my current property's taxes?
So there is a 1% limit in terms of taxes on properties, yes. However, this doesn't deal with the amount taxed. It has to do with the assessed value. Yeah. On the reassessment side. So reassessment, again, is not the property tax rate, it's the assessed value that's being taxed.
Yeah, so hopefully that answered her question. And then Heather asked the question, what if you want to make the inherited house your primary residence? And that's exempt, correct?
Yes, so if the inherited house is your primary residence, then you are exempt from it, exactly. Yeah.
And then Carmen asks, does it matter with the proposition if you're offspring or extended relatives? Who's affected by an inheritance? I would guess it's anybody named in a will or in a trust, right? I don't think that the proposition specifies relationships. No, I don't think so.
It does say on Voter's Edge that the special rules for inherited properties apply to passing between parents and children, and also apply between grandparents and grandchildren if the grandchildren's parents are deceased. So if it could skip 1 generation if that generation's missing.
Ah, good. And Kim corrected me on this. This applies to some counties, not all counties in California.
No, what I meant was, you were right, Susan. What I meant is that currently with Prop 13, you can only take your benefit with you to these counties that are listed in the chat, but Prop 19 would make it work for the whole state.
Yeah, okay. And then someone asks, Maya asks, does this apply if the property is held in a trust? And I believe the answer is yes.
Again, I don't know of any language that specifies one way or the other.
Yeah, it would just be inheritance law, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but I also got that last one wrong, so I want to make sure that I'm not.
we are not lawyers. And then I think that's it. Reese is asking, I'm curious about Heather's question. Oh, even if you're changing your primary address from another house to the inherited property, are you still exempt?
So as long as you can show that the inherited property is in fact your primary residence, you are exempt. Okay, so we're going to move on. Apologies if we're not hitting all the questions. We've got a bunch more still to go through, so hopefully we're getting most of these. Okay, so the next one is Prop 20. Prop 20 is stricter parole for nonviolent crimes, felony sentences for certain offenses currently treated as misdemeanors. And this was a citizens initiative statute. So, okay, so back in the 80s and 90s, our prison system essentially exploded in large part due to the war on drugs and other punitive new laws that came into effect. And so we had a whole bunch, a whole new wave of people in the prison systems. Since then, in recent years, we've passed several pieces of legislation to reduce prison overcrowding and just generally reduce the prison population. That includes Prop 47 in 2014 and Prop 57 in 2016. What Proposition 20 does is it goes back towards the stricter sentencing for crimes, and it undoes a lot of the things that were put in place due to Prop 47 and Prop 57. So specifically, what Prop 20 would do is it would authorize felony charges for specified theft crimes currently charged as misdemeanors, including some theft crimes where the value is as low as $250. Prop 20 would also establish 2 additional types of crime, serial crime and organized retail crime, and it would charge those as wobblers. So wobblers are a fun new thing. I believe that was from Prop 57 a few years ago, which are crimes that can be charged as either misdemeanor or a felony, depending on the circumstances. Prop 20 would also broaden the requirement to collect DNA, including for some misdemeanor convictions. It would limit access to parole programs for some nonviolent offenders who have completed the full term of their primary offense, and it would change the parole rules. It would also add 51 crimes to the list of felony crimes classified as violent, meaning that there is no eligibility for early parole. And it changes how information is handled when a person is released on supervision. So the fiscal effects of Proposition 20 would that it would likely cost tens of millions of dollars annually, because again, if you have more people in jail, in prison, that's more of a taxpayer cost. And then it might also require the building of additional prisons, in which case that would be a significantly further increased cost as well. So, supporters, there's more than 200 organizations and officials in support, and they say that Proposition 20 reclassifies certain crimes like assault with a deadly weapon, date rape, and child abuse as violent crimes, that it would not increase the prison population, it would make sure that people serve their entire sentence, and that it would help stop car break-ins, shoplifting, and other thefts that have been on the rise. Opponents include 75 organizations and officials, and they say that Prop 20 will roll back prison reforms and cost taxpayers millions of dollars annually, that it slashes mental health and rehabilitation programs that help to prepare people for release from prison and reduce repeat offenses, that it will result in extreme sentences for petty theft and will disproportionately impact vulnerable minorities. And they say that California prison reforms are working, the number of incarcerated adults is decreasing, and California property and violent crime rates are at historic lows. So again, a yes vote means that people who commit certain theft-related crimes would receive increased penalties, and additional factors would be considered for releasing certain inmates from prison early, and that law enforcement would be required to collect DNA samples from certain adults convicted of certain misdemeanors. A no vote does not change any of the current laws around this. there are no questions on Prop 20, I'm going to move on to Prop 21, which is another property one. This expands local government's authority to enact rent control on residential property. This is a citizens initiative statute that was forwarded by the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. So back in the 1970s, I'm sorry, I'm skipping around here. Back in the 1970s and 80s, there were various rent control measures that were enacted across California, which prompted a backlash law in 1995 called Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, which prohibits rent control on single-family homes and any housing built after early 1995. In the meantime, renting in California has become increasingly expensive, including being home to 6 of the nation's 11 most expensive rental markets: San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland, Orange County, San Diego, and Los Angeles. So what Prop 21 would do is it would modify the Costa-Hawkins law to allow for rent control on all housing that is more than 15 years old, as opposed to the current law of housing built before 1995. And it allows for rent control on single-family homes if the landlord owns more than 2 properties. It further allows for rent control on new tenants, not just existing tenants. However, it does continue to require that, even with rent control, the landlord receives a fair rate of return. So, according to the LAO, the fiscal impact of Prop 21 would be that the value of rental properties would likely decline due to some landlords selling their rental properties. This would result in lower assessed valuations and therefore lower property taxes, which could reduce state and local revenues by tens of millions of dollars annually. Supporters of Prop 21 say that homelessness is a serious and growing problem. Small increases in rent can force more families into homelessness, which can be a burden on the entire community. The high cost of housing in California leaves many seniors and veterans with too few resources for necessities such as food and medical care. That Prop 21 guarantees landlords a fair rate of return, and that it allows communities to limit their rent increase and preserve affordable housing. Opponents say that more than 60% of California voters rejected a nearly identical proposal in 2018, that rent control results in less available and hence less affordable housing, that Prop 21 will reduce the number of new housing units built, cost jobs, and hurt the economic recovery, and that a nonpartisan analysis estimates that if Prop 21 passes, housing values could be reduced by up to 20%. So again, Prop 21, a yes vote means that state law would allow cities and counties to apply more kinds of rent controls to more properties than under current law, and a no vote maintains the status quo. Okay, Prop 22. Prop 22 is another one that we've seen a lot of ads on in both directions. So hopefully we'll clear up some of that right now. So Prop 22 exempts app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers. It is a citizens initiative statute that was brought forward by the app-based companies, so Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and the like. So the history of this is that last year in 2019, Assembly Bill 5 passed. And Assembly Bill 5 required that rideshare and delivery companies like Uber, Lyft, DoorDash categorize their workers as employees instead of independent contractors. The rideshare and delivery companies then refused to implement the mandates from AB 5. And so this resulted in a pending court case. And then ultimately the app share companies brought forward this proposition. So this proposition is supposed to be a compromise of the current state and AB 5. So what it says is that people who work for Uber, Lyft, and all the rest would continue to be independent contractors. They would not be employees. So they would not receive employee benefits and protections, including minimum wage, overtime, unemployment insurance, and workers' comp. They would also not receive health insurance, but they would receive a health stipend. It would prohibit drivers from working more than 12 hours in a 24-hour period for a single rideshare delivery company. And it would require those rideshare companies to pay at least 120% of minimum wage when the driver is actively engaged. And so when the driver has either, food that they are delivering or someone in the car with them, they're being paid 120% of minimum wage. If they're waiting, they are not guaranteed the 120% of minimum wage. So the fiscal analysis is that there is going to be an anticipated minor increase in state income taxes paid by rideshare and delivery companies. It would allow companies to charge lower fares and delivery fees, and with lower prices, customers would take more rides and place more orders, and that it could increase the company's profits, which would increase the company's stock prices. So supporters say by a 4-to-1 margin, 80% of app-based drivers support maintaining independent contractor status due to time flexibility. They say that AB 5 will result in loss of jobs, longer wait times, significantly higher customer prices, and permanent shutdown of services. That it would improve app-based work by requiring companies to provide new benefits, and that it would create expanded public safety protections such as background checks and safety courses, zero tolerance for drug and alcohol offenses. Opponents say that Prop 22 eliminates basic workplace benefits and replaces them with new lower payments designed to save the companies money. Companies are already required to perform background checks, but Prop 22 would eliminate required sexual harassment training and investigation of sexual harassment claims. That a majority of app-based drivers are full-time, with 70% working 30 hours a week, and deserve the same treatment as other employees. So again, a yes vote means that app-based rideshares and delivery companies could hire drivers as independent contractors. Drivers could decide when, where, and how much to work, but they would not get the standard benefits and protections that businesses provide employees. A no vote means that app-based rideshare and delivery companies would have to hire the drivers as employees pending a court decision, and that drivers would then have less choice about when, where, and how much to work, but they would get the standard benefits and protections that businesses must provide employees. So, do you have any questions on Prop 22?
Yes.
And I'm going to try and do this really quickly because I know we're behind also.
Yeah. Does the measure say anything about preventing unionization? I don't believe so.
I don't believe so either. I think that we would have that in there.
And then Caden asked the question I think that most people ask is, my impression was that AB 50 affected all independent contractors, not just Uber, Lyft, et cetera. How does this factor into Prop 22? And my answer would be that this is a carve out for these specific.
Yeah, it specifically says app-based rideshare and delivery drivers.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you're right in that historically, your primary employees are not supposed to be independent contractors. That's already the case. However, they passed AB 5 to explicitly say this for app shared drivers. Okay.
Someone asked about what the drivers say. You can read the supporters' background positions and get more information about that.
Yes, and that's part of what makes this one complicated. And so is that I'm sure that there are some drivers who prefer the flexibility of being an independent contractor, and I'm sure that there are some drivers who would prefer to have the benefits and protections of being an employee. Okay, Proposition 23 establishes state requirements for kidney dialysis clinics, requires on-site medical professional. This is a citizens initiative statute. So this specifically was brought forward by a union. And so you might actually recognize this because this is very similar to a proposition that was on the November 2018 ballot that also dealt with dialysis clinic. So that proposition and this one were brought forward by the same union. Essentially, there's a conflict between the union and the state's two largest dialysis business, DaVita and Fresenius Medical Care. And that union brought forward both of these. So there's a few things that Proposition 23 does, but the main thing that Proposition 23 does is that it requires at least one licensed physician to be on-site dialysis clinics at all times during treatment hours. So the current law says that clinics must have a medical director who is a board certified physician, and that each patient visiting the clinic, their physicians must visit them at least once per month in the dialysis clinic. However, this would make it so that there has to be a physician on site at all times. Other things that Prop 23 would do is that it would require clinics to report dialysis-related infection data to state and federal governments. It would prohibit clinics from closing or reducing services without state approval, and it would prohibit clinics from refusing to treat patients based on the source of payment, so Medicare, Medi-Cal, private insurance. So the fiscal impact of this is that it would increase costs for dialysis clinics by several hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. The clinics could respond to these by spreading costs across multiple clinics, negotiating increased rates with insurance payers, continuing current operations but with lower profits, or closing some clinics, or a combination of all of these strategies. Because so much of dialysis treatment is paid for by Medi-Cal and Medicare, Prop 23 would likely increase healthcare costs for state and local governments by the low tens of millions of dollars annually. So supporters say dialysis is a dangerous procedure, and if something goes wrong, a doctor or a highly trained nurse should be nearby. That dialysis patients are prone to infections from their treatments, which can lead to more serious illnesses or death, and that proper reporting and transparency of infection rates encourages clinics to improve quality, and that strong protections should be provided by to vulnerable patients when clinics close. Opponents say the increased cost of requiring on-site physicians at every clinic would force clinics to cut services and even close, that full-time on-site physicians are not necessary because dialysis patients are already under the care of their personal kidney physician, and dialysis treatments are administered by specially trained personnel, that Prop 23 could make our physician shortage worse and lead to more emergency room overcrowding, and that dialysis clinics are already strictly regulated and provide high quality healthcare. So again, Prop 23, the main thing would be that chronic dialysis clinics would be required to have a doctor on site during all patient treatment hours. A no vote means that clinics would not be required to have a doctor on site during treatment hours. And if we don't have any questions that we can't answer, I'm going to pass it back on over to Kim.
Thank you. I don't see any questions on that, so I'll go right into Prop 24, which amends consumer privacy laws. So the background on this one is in 2018, a San Francisco-based real estate developer named Alistair McTaggart was the proponent of a ballot initiative regarding consumer privacy. Then the state legislature got out in front of the measure by passing its own compromise bill, the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, the CCPA. So the original ballot initiative was withdrawn. Now, McTaggart thought that the CCPA was a great baseline, but there were additional rights that Californians deserve. Since this is a ballot initiative, the legislature would not have the power to make amendments. It would require another ballot initiative to amend it. So Prop 24 would amend the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018. It would create a new state agency, the California Privacy Protection Agency, to investigate violations, assess penalties, and develop regulations. It would permit consumers to prevent businesses from sharing personal information, correct inaccurate personal information, and limit businesses' use of sensitive personal information. And it would also prohibit businesses from holding onto your data for longer than necessary. It would raise the penalty when companies violate children's privacy rights. It would increase penalties and remove the ability of businesses to fix violations before being penalized. And it would reduce the number of businesses that have to comply, making it only apply to companies that buy or sell data of at least 100,000 households per year. The current law applies to companies that buy or sell data of 50,000 devices per year. So it's going from 50,000 devices to 100,000 households. So it will apply to fewer companies. The fiscal effects would be increased state costs of at least $10 million annually for the new state agency, costs for increased court and Department of Justice enforcement workload. Some or all of these costs would be paid for by penalties collected for violations of consumer privacy laws. There would be an unknown impact on state and local tax revenues due to economic effects resulting from new requirements for businesses to protect consumer data. The supporters say Prop 24 would prevent businesses from using or sharing sensitive data about your health, finances, race, ethnicity, and precise location. They say it would strengthen existing protections by establishing a new California Privacy Protection Agency. They say by virtue of being a ballot initiative, it is less vulnerable to watering down through the pressure that lobbyists put on legislators. They also say it would give consumers more ability to sue companies if their email and password are stolen or hacked. $5.5 million raised by supporters. The opponents are closer to $48,000. There are 20 organizations. They say that Prop 24 puts the burden on consumers to opt out of countless intrusive data collection practices one by one that companies are currently barred from by default. They also say that hidden economic discrimination persists. People without money to spend cannot pay for loyalty programs and can expect worse connections, slower downloads, and more pop-up ads. They say Prop 24 would allow employers to keep gathering data about things like employees' pregnancies, religion, or political activism. Also, California's data privacy law just went into effect this year, so some argue that we should wait and see how it plays out before changing it. And they say some of the updates in Prop 24 would hurt consumers. It would delay a rule that allows workers to find out what information employers collect about them. It would make it easier for businesses to charge you more if you don't let them sell your data. And it would allow tech companies to grab your data when you leave California. So a yes means existing consumer data privacy laws and rights would be expanded. Businesses required to meet privacy requirements would change. A new state agency would oversee and enforce state consumer privacy laws. A no means that businesses would continue to be required to follow existing consumer data privacy laws. Consumers would continue to have existing data privacy rights, and the state's Department of Justice would continue to oversee and enforce these laws. And I'm going to go back to you, Kate, at this point.
All right, we're almost done with the propositions, and then we can move on to the measures, people. I know, it's a lot, it's a lot. So, Proposition 25. This is a referendum on law that replaced money bail with a system based on public safety and flight risk. This is a veto referendum. So, this referendum was funded by a PAC that was primarily composed of bail bond companies. And what happened was that in 2018, the California state legislature passed SB 10, which would eliminate the bail system so that people arrested or arraigned in court might not have to post bail in order to stay free pending their trial. SB 10 did not go into effect because the bail bond companies passed or proposed this referendum. So this is the bail bond companies' response to SB 10, which they don't want to go into practice. So for those of you who aren't really familiar with what bail is, the bail system says that when, if I get arrested for a crime and I go up before a judge, we set our next court date. So I will, within California, you have to go in front of a judge, I want to say within 48 hours. But then when your actual court date is, and so when you're in front of a jury and you're, the decisions are made around whether or not you're guilty, that can take a very long time. So what happens currently in California is that during your initial hearing, right after you're arrested, the judge can say either you have to stay in jail until your court date, or you have to pay a certain amount to go free until your court date. What this does is it gets rid of that bail, or I'm sorry, what SB 10 did was it got rid of bail. It was saying that that was essentially a tax, that it was unfair to people who are economically disadvantaged because you have to pay to be free, essentially. So they passed SB 10, which gets rid of the bail system, and instead of bail, just has a system of risk. And so essentially, if the judge deems that you are moderately or highly at flight risk or risk to society, then you have to stay in jail. However, if you don't meet those criteria, then you are free to go without having to post any bail. So this referendum, what this referendum does, and it's kind of, this referendum, and I'm going to go actually forward a few because it's kind of, it can be perceived as backwards. So Prop 25 is in response to SB 10, and it is a veto referendum. But a yes vote essentially upholds SB 10. So it says no one would pay bail to be released from jail before trial. And then instead, people would either be released automatically or based on their assessed risk of committing another crime or not appearing in court. And so a yes vote upholds SB 10. A no vote means that some people would continue to pay bail to be released from jail before trial. Fees may continue to be charged as a condition of release. And the reason that I wanted to do that before we went on into fiscal effects is that because this was brought forward by the bail companies, that can be confusing for people, and some people can think it's the other way around. So we really want to make that clear. So going back to the fiscal bottom line, if Prop 25 passed, essentially the new release process would increase the workload for state trial courts, district attorneys, and public defenders. These costs could be in the hundreds of millions of dollars annually, but that is less than 1% of the state's current general fund budget. It could also have possible reduced jail costs if fewer people are being held in jail or for shorter periods of time, but the actual size of these effects is uncertain and would really depend on how the proposition is interpreted and implemented. It could also result in reduced fees paid to the state on bail bonds. So, supporters of Prop 25 say that the current system favors rich defendants who can easily make bail and keeps poor defendants and defendants of color in jail. It says that people who are eventually found not guilty or even not charged may be stuck with large debts to pay off the bail or their fees. That wealth inequality currently is a huge factor in determining who is able to make bail and who has to remain in jail awaiting trial. And there's been nearly $12 million raised with 75 organizations and elected officials in support of Prop 25. Opponents, on the other hand, say that the intentions of SB 10 are good, but its provisions may effectively result in more people being jailed than under the current situation, and that Prop 25 will cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars a year, overburdening courts and creating a new bureaucracy. There's been $6.2 million raised and about 120 organizations in opposition. So again, just one more time for total clarity, Prop 25 would uphold SB 10. Sorry, my computer's doing stuff. So Prop 25 would uphold SB 10, which means that it would get rid of that bail system. A no vote means that the bail system would remain in place. So that is our last proposition. However, we have 5 local measures to go for after this. So if there are any pressing questions, I will address those, but otherwise we can try and bust out those measures as quickly as we can. Great. So at this point, if you are not a resident of San Diego, these measures do not apply to you. These are specifically for the city of San Diego and the San Diego Unified School District. So if you're not part of San Diego, I'd like to excuse you at this point. However, please remember, all of the information that you learned here tonight, as well as additional information, can be found on Voter's Edge. Okay, got through 12 props, or 5 measures. Here they are. We're going to start with Measure A. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Measure A is the issuance of affordable housing bonds, and it was proposed by the San Diego Housing Federation. Because this is a local bond measure, this does require 2/3 majority to pass. So what Measure A does is that it allows for the issuance of $900 million in local bonds and bonds to be issued locally in order to pay for housing for extremely low income to low income individuals. The background is that, as we all know, San Diego has a severe shortage of affordable housing, that almost 200,000 households are in that extremely low and low income categories. And the majority of these households are paying more than 50% for housing. So what Measure A would do is it would increase property taxes, again, going back to property taxes, it would increase property taxes in the city of San Diego to secure up to $900 million in bonds to be issued by the city. Those bond proceeds would be used to provide affordable housing for vulnerable populations. And those bond proceeds would be leveraged by attracting private and public matching funds, including from state and federal resources. So the property tax effects of this. So remember, bonds are a loan, which is principal and interest. So that's $900 million of principal plus interest. So the entire cost of this, that principal plus interest, is estimated to have a $3.14 increase in property taxes per $100,000 of assessed value in 2022. And so what that means for the average homeowner, the average median home in San Diego has an assessed value of $679,000. And so what that would mean would be a total annual increase in property taxes of $21.33 by 2022. However, after that, they would continue to issue until they likely got all of that $900 million issued. And so by 2028, the average increase in property taxes would be $20 per $100,000 of assessed value, which translates to a total annual increase in property taxes of $141.54 if you have a median home of $679,000. So, supporters of Prop A say that this would allow San Diego to provide a long-term policy to address homelessness and also provide affordable homes so that hardworking San Diego families can afford to stay in San Diego, that it would generate local funds needed to match millions in federal and state matching funds that San Diego currently cannot access, that it would create safe, clean, and healthy homes for low-income seniors, veterans, and those with mental health and physical-related disabilities, and that it would provide affordable homes near jobs for low-income families. Opponents, on the other hand, say that in just the first 5 years under Measure A, the average homeowner will see their property tax increase by $500 or more. Taxpayers will be on the hook to pay for this property tax increase for more than 40 years. That San Diego already has the highest property tax rate in the county, and too many working families are struggling with the high cost of living. That Measure A fails to protect taxpayers by refusing to ban controversial project labor agreements that discriminate against non-union firms, which are predominantly small, veteran-owned and minority-owned businesses, and that recent studies have shown that projects that would be funded by Measure A have been riddled by wasteful spending and financial mismanagement. So again, a yes vote means that this would authorize the issuance and sale of up to $900 million in general obligation bonds secured by new property taxes within the city of San Diego to provide affordable housing. A no vote does not allow for that issuance. Pass it back over to Kim one last time.
All right, thanks, Kate. So Measure B would create an independent commission on police practices. Currently, the city has a community review board on police practices, but it does not independently investigate any reported incidents, nor does it have subpoena power or the use of outside experts. For legal questions, this board refers to the city attorney. There's also a citizens advisory board on police community relations, whose purpose is to study, understand, and recommend changes related to the San Diego Police Department. This group also refers to the city attorney. Board members for both groups are appointed by the mayor plus a majority vote of the city council. Measure B would amend the City of San Diego charter to dissolve the Community Review Board on Police Practices and establish an independent commission on police practices appointed by the City Council. The new commission would investigate officer-involved shootings and deaths from interaction with a police officer or while a person is in the custody of the police. It would review and evaluate all complaints against city police officers. It would be granted subpoena powers and allowed to hire outside experts, including attorneys. As far as the fiscal effects, it's estimated that the necessary staffing and budget for the commission could range from $1.2 million annually up to $2.6 million. Current funding for the Community Review Board is approximately $247,000. So that would no longer be required, resulting in a net cost of $950,000 to $2.35 million annually. And the funding would come from the city's general fund. Supporters say the Independent Commission on Police Practices will be able to hire outside experts, including attorneys. They will not depend on the city attorney, who also represents the mayor and the San Diego Police Department. They say the charter amendments will allow for independent experts to investigate claims of police misconduct and grant the commission subpoena power to obtain witness testimony and documents, enforceable through contempt proceedings under state law. You can see the supporters there: San Diegans for Justice, Women Occupy San Diego, NAACP, CPI, and ACLU. There was no argument filed with the Office of the City Clerk in opposition. So a yes vote means amending the city's charter to replace the Community Review Board on Police Practices with the Commission on Police Practices that would be appointed by the City Council. A no vote means maintaining the Community Review Board on Police Practices with no subpoena power or use of outside attorneys and experts. All right, so Measure C, establish district-only elections for members of the Board of Education of the San Diego Unified School District. Members of the public submitted this ballot measure proposal for consideration by the City Council, which voted to place it on the ballot. It's submitted only to those voters who are registered to vote within the San Diego School District boundaries. Speaking of those boundaries, Measure C would provide a district-only process for electing school board members. Kate, can you move to the map? Thank you. So this would be the same process that is used to elect city council members. It replaces language referring to registered voters of the whole San Diego Unified School District with language referring to registered voters of each Board of Education district. So the current citywide school district elections process was adopted back in 1931, when San Diego had only 125,000 residents. The fiscal effects would just result in a relatively small reduction in election costs for the school district. This is supported by the people you'll see listed on the screen in just a moment. Supporters say at-large elections weaken the representation of small groups, especially people of color that don't have a citywide base, allowing special interests to elect their preferred candidate. Kate, can you get the supporters list up? Thank you. They also say that Measure C will reduce the time candidates spend on fundraising to remain competitive in citywide races, allowing them to focus on delivering solutions to parents, students, and their communities. They say the current election process does not result in a board reflecting the diversity of the district, but district-only elections assure voters fairer representation. So the opponents say the present system balances community needs and larger concerns by ensuring every board member cares about all the kids in every neighborhood in San Diego Unified. They say district-only elections can be dominated by big money special interests who will be able to elect board members who are beholden to them. They say special interests who want to privatize public education are behind Measure C. And they also say the 5 districts are likely to be unbalanced, with low-income neighborhoods grouped into 1 or 2 districts. So vote-rich areas would be able to elect a board majority and dominate school funding and other educational decisions. A yes vote means amending the charter to elect school board members by voters from their respective districts. No means the existing law remains unchanged and school board members are elected citywide. Measure D. Procedures for filling vacancies, removal for cause, and succession to office for members of the San Diego Unified School District Board of Education. Currently, the city charter includes election procedures when there is a vacancy on the school board, but it does not define what constitutes a vacancy, nor does it provide for the removal of school board members. An incident in 2019 brought to the attention of the San Diego City Council that there is no procedure in place to remove a board member. This measure would subject San Diego Unified School Board members to the same legal procedures to remove and replace other elected officials for cause in situations of dereliction of duty or malfeasance in office. So dereliction of duty means an adjudication that the school board member failed, refused, or neglected to perform the duties of office. And malfeasance means a member was convicted for crimes of moral turpitude or crimes involving a violation of official duties. 3/4 of the school board members would need to vote that cause exists to remove the member, and a special election would be held in which voters would be asked to decide whether to remove and replace the school board member. There's no fiscal impact associated with this charter amendment. Supporters say the city charter should protect the public from politicians who abuse their office by committing serious crimes or failing to perform their duties. They say the city charter amendments incorporate best practices used by other major cities regarding the removal of elected officials. And they say this measure reduces the need for a costly and time-consuming recall if a board member refuses to resign. No argument against the measure was filed with the Office of the City Clerk. A yes vote means amending the city charter to bring the San Diego Unified School District board members under existing city laws, providing procedures to remove elected officials for cause, to fill vacancies, and to govern succession to the office. The no vote means there would be no change. All right, we're on our last one, Measure E, removing a 30-foot height limit in Midway Pacific Highway Community Plan area. In 1972, voters in the city of San Diego approved a citizen initiative measure that limited new buildings in the coastal zone of the city to a height of 30 feet. Community members of the Midway Pacific area feel that needed rejuvenation is hampered by the height limitation, and this exemption would allow for development in the area. So if we can go to the map, you'll see that the Midway Pacific Highway Community Plan area is near Point Loma and the airport. Measure E would amend the San Diego Municipal Code to exclude this area from the existing 30-foot height limit. It leaves in place the existing municipal code height requirements, which vary per parcel. And since it's near the airport, of course, there are limits. It's not going to be a super tall building that gets built there. The fiscal effects, nothing associated with this amendment. This supporters say Prop D back in the 70s was intended to prevent Miami Beach type high rises erected along the waterfront, and the Midway is certainly not an ocean view corridor. They say Measure E is the catalyst to modernizing the 54-year-old sports arena and is the key to creating a pedestrian-friendly, transit-oriented community with entertainment, shops, and outdoor recreation. And they say the Midway Community Planning Group unanimously supports removing the 30 in Midway because it will bring to life the community's vision for a thriving cultural and economic hub. Opponents say Measure E could be the first step towards San Diego lifting the height limit in the rest of the coastal zone, Pacific Beach, Ocean Beach, Mission Beach, and Point Loma. They say the community plan for this project area describes 1,324 acres total, of which 980 acres are public land and public right-of-ways, and that we can have a vast greenbelt park of sports fields, recreation areas, and a restored stretch of San Diego River for kayak and paddleboard journeys to San Diego Bay. They say this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to convert 200+ acres to a park. And they say the scheme means worse freeway congestion, overloaded beach access roads, and no parking. A yes vote on Measure E means allowing construction of buildings over 30 feet tall in the Midway Pacific Highway Community Plan area, and a no means continuing the 30-foot height limit there. So I just want to leave you with a reminder about Voters Edge. I mentioned it several times. It's an excellent resource with all the information we presented this evening, including campaign registration data, and that is updated daily. SDvote.com is the Registrar of Voters website. And if you haven't received your ballot, they're saying that you should call on October 19th. So next Monday, if you still haven't received it in the mail, you should call and they can send you a The Easy Voter Guide is an excellent source for new voters and busy voters. If you know someone who doesn't even have time to attend something like this, but they just want to glance at one PDF with everything in one place, easyvoterguide.org is the website for that one. League of Women Voters of San Diego website has our voter resources page. You can find a list of future prop talks like this one. You can attend a candidate forum or other upcoming events, and you can view videos of our past events. Next slide, please. Is it stuck?
My screen might be frozen. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. It was just a reminder of our website. And of course, we're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Yeah, so thank you all so much for being here with us this evening. We appreciate you taking time out to learn all about this. And I know that there's a lot of questions that we're not going to be able to get to. But Kate, if you see anything there that you feel like you can answer, go for it by all means. The video of this event will be put on our website tomorrow. So if you just go to lwvsandiego.org, click event videos, you will find it there. Kate, did you have anything that you wanted to answer? I know the chat is moving very quickly and it might be hard to read things, but Susan, do you want to let us know if there was something that we
I tried
can
to respond to a few, but I clearly was struggling to keep up.
Yeah, there were a lot of general questions about issuing bonds, really detailed questions about understanding how bonds are issued and paid and bought and sold. That would be a whole webinar, I think, on its own.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe Kate can give that one.
Yeah, really quickly, bonds are sold, you hear stocks and bonds together for a reason, because they're available generally through the same publicly traded platform. So generally your financial advisor or something like E-Trade or Charles Schwab, you can just go in and anyone can buy, you know, San Diego bond, California bond, any publicly traded bond.
Thanks for all the nice comments in the chat.
I know.
Yeah, and thank you all for putting up with a lot of information, and a lot of it's really dry. So thanks for sticking through all of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for making the chat lively. It was good.
Yeah. All right, everyone have a good evening. See you next time, hopefully in person with drinks.
Yes.